one. So welcome everybody to today's Protective and Social Services Committee. On this committee is myself, Councillors O'Toole, Councillors Friesen, and Mayor Clayton. So we'll start off our meeting with our delegations and our first report, which is our directors. Director Manuel, did you want the other? Is there anybody else here in attendance that would be speaking? I know your name is beside all these, but I wasn't sure if anybody was here from any of the organizations. So seeing none, I'll turn it forward to you for your director's service area report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to report that in community social development, the Women of Influence event was held on March 5th and was well attended with over 200 attendees. So I would like to extend my appreciation to the organizers of the event and congratulations to all the nominees and winners of this year's awards. The Unconscious Bias event is going to be another event held on March 21st in partnership with the Grande Prairie Local Immigration Partnership. It's a free virtual event at 2:30 p.m. and it is celebrating the International Day for the Elimination of Racism and Discrimination, which is also held on March 21st. Additionally, I can report that the Government of Alberta has extended funding to the COVID Hotel Isolation Program to September of 2021. Some positive news. Within Enforcement Services, they report that they're developing and finalizing a formal agreement between the city and county to manage and operate the regional pound animal care facility. And there's also a RFP, so request for proposals, that's open at the moment, soliciting tow company contracts for the city and RCMP. And that process is expected to conclude next week. In GPREP, they report that they're bringing forward a recommendation to the GPREP agency to use Office 365, particularly the Teams platform, to develop a robust emergency coordination center software tool for GPREP. That'll essentially be how information flows through the various sections. So it's nice to be able to leverage technology that's common in the marketplace and within our organizations to be more effective in those environments. The fire department reports that they are undergoing significant flow testing through their self-contained breathing apparatus through the month of March. Given the volume of apparatus that they have and the importance of that equipment, it is essential that it be tested and all necessary repairs be made. So it's good to see that's underway. And some really good news out of the RCMP detachment. So I just got notification of two significant incidents in the last couple of days. So one involved a traffic stop that was conducted by the Crime Reduction Unit, which resulted in the recovery of a stolen vehicle out of Grande Prairie. Both the driver and passenger were arrested. Searches identified cocaine, heroin, and a loaded rifle. As a result, two of the individuals were remanded into custody and will have court dates later this month. And in another investigation, the general duty section actually received complaints from a resident in this hillside area, and following an investigation, which they conducted themselves into drug trafficking, a search warrant was performed on the house with the assistance of Alert and the Grande Prairie RCMP dog section. And as a result, a rifle, shotgun, loaded .45 caliber handgun, 2 replica pistols, large amounts of ammunition, methamphetamine, GHB, cocaine, and cash were seized, and 2 people charged with an assortment of charges. The reason I emphasize general duty is those are the officers that are taking the regular calls for service that come in through the days. It wasn't a typical drug unit or investigative unit. So really positive to see the proactive work being done by some members on those on that shift to go that extra mile, and the results are obviously very tangible. So, congrats to them for their efforts there. And thank you to the community members that reached out and expressed their concern and provided information related to the activities. So, the only other thing to add in the director update is the RCMP's annual performance plan meeting with community stakeholders is scheduled via Zoom for March 23rd, 2021. So that's the service area update. Any questions?
All right, thanks for that, Director Manuel. Any questions for Director Manuel? Okay, seeing none. We'll move into the next item if you want to keep going with the 2021-2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So by way of background,
sorry,
the administration...
Director Manuel, I just see Councillor Freeze's hand up there, please.
Thank you. You'll note that I've declared a conflict of interest in eScribe, and I'll be shutting off my camera and not participating in the discussion or vote here.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Councillor Freeze. Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor or Director Manuel.
Certainly. So by way of background, over the past 2 years, administrations conducted a significant amount of work in regard to affordable housing. This has included the completion of a detailed housing needs assessment, working with Grande Prairie Foundation on their housing needs assessment, as well as formulating a draft affordable housing strategy. The documents were intended to improve both the current state and future needs of affordable housing in the city. With that being said, those documents were prepared before the global COVID-19 pandemic and the associated economic downturn that we've seen. So due to the unforeseen circumstances, the impacts of those were not accounted for directly within our housing needs assessment or the previous draft affordable housing strategy. However, we are seeing the impacts of both the downturn and the pandemic to be rather significant. And although we don't know the complete impacts as of yet, we do understand there's been an increase in unemployment, there's an increase in homelessness, rental vacancies have increased. All of these circumstances have led administration to believe a pause on the long-term implementation of our affordable housing strategy is necessary so we can pivot and target our available funding that we have in front of us at the moment to support existing affordable housing projects and programs within the city. So one of the things that Council was made aware of around fall budget deliberations and ultimately led to a referral to this committee was that the Grand Spirit Foundation reported that one of their heavily subscribed programs, which was direct rental subsidy, was in line for a budget cut of approximately 25% or $750,000 a year. And that program at the time had 250 people waiting for on their applicant list. However, it's likely underrepresented as new applicants have not been accepted as that program has been under review for the last couple of years. So the true demand was likely higher than that. So in preparing a plan and how administration believes we can provide immediate support to struggling residents, leverage our existing assets and seize funding opportunities, and help us prepare for the future, the following actions are recommended as part of our Affordable Housing Action Plan. So the first which is Action 1, which would be rental supplement programs for a limited 2-year term. This would be in conjunction with the Grande Prairie Foundation, where in $650,000 in 2021 and $650,000 in 2022 would be allocated to the program. Administration sees this as the fastest means to provide aid to those required houses. Infrastructure is already in place. The program is existing, and clients can remain within their homes or relocate at their own discretion. We're not creating that extra burden or cost by having dedicated units per se. The 2-year term is desirable in that administration believes that the National Housing Benefit, which is a federal program that's going to provide rent subsidies to provinces to be allocated, will come into fruition at some point in the next couple of years. Several provinces have signed on to an agreement which requires the feds in province both to contribute to the funds. It's our understanding that the agreement has not been signed between the province of Alberta and the federal government to date, but it is anticipated that that will occur in the next couple of years. So we really see this funding as gap funding and not something for us to continue in perpetuity, but hopefully those other levels of government sort out their contract details and flow that money into the community. Action 2 would be the completion of land studies required to fully develop the city-owned Smith lands. So as council is aware, previous sales of social housing units in Mount View were used to acquire a parcel of land in Smith subdivision. That parcel of land is receiving servicing this year. And through that servicing, the development opportunities have now increased. The Grande Prairie Foundation has made a request to the city to help support the geotechnical, traffic impact, and environmental assessments of the lands to help determine their viabilities for various projects and to help support the advancement of business cases. So the city is proposing that we will undertake that work with a budget of up to $100,000. However, we do believe a good deal of this work can be completed with our internal resources, and the results of which will be shared with potential organizations, including the Grande Prairie Foundation, so they can use that information in their development plans, business cases. Action 3 we've identified is to provide seed funding for a continuing care project in Grande Prairie. Alberta Health Services has identified that an approximate estimated deficit of 150 continuing care beds exists within our community. The provincial government has acknowledged this is a challenge for the province, has included $500 million in capital funding over 3 years to create more spaces within their recent budget announcement. This seed funding can be used by organizations such as Grande Prairie Foundation and potential P3 partners to advance a business case to secure Grande Prairie allocated funding for continuing care. Action 4 would involve the transfer of social housing units owned by the City of Grande Prairie to the Grande Prairie Foundation. The City of Grande Prairie presently owns 19 social housing homes. These homes are free of debt and are already managed by the Grande Prairie Foundation. Administration's recommending transferring title subject to some conditions. Those conditions primarily being that the funds or assets are used to further projects within the City of Grande Prairie as opposed to the broader region. And that these homes can then be leveraged to fund new or more appropriate accommodations as Grande Prairie Foundation sees fit. So at this point, the City of Grande Prairie is primarily just the title holder of these properties. They're completely administered by the Grande Prairie Foundation to support their client list. So we just see it as a reasonable step to transfer the units to them and allow them to leverage those assets to bring on new product. And Action 5 would be consulting services to private and non-government organizations. The city, as council is likely aware, shares a great deal of our internal knowledge regarding affordable housing and various funding streams we're aware of regarding municipal, provincial, and federal programs to proponents of potential projects. So where possible, we will continue to assist with navigating the complexities of various processes. And Action 6 would be a revised housing needs and affordable housing strategy. This will be important as it will really help guide us on our path forward. Federal census is scheduled for this spring. The federal census really provides the backbone of the information that we require and the details at a really granular level that allow us to assess where we're at today and where we're moving in the future. So we see this 2-year window during the action plan as an opportunity to take what we learned on our previous housing needs assessment and our affordable housing strategies and pivot it to what circumstances are in our current state and understand where our projections from 2016 to 2021 fell in comparison to reality. So that should provide us a more solid footing moving forward. So as alternatives, the administration has received submissions and feedback from several parties interested in affordable housing. They have been invaluable in helping us identify what our challenges and opportunities are. Some of the proposed projects we received included homeowner assistance grants, purchase of private buildings, per door incentives. Administration acknowledges a place for all of these programs. However, we are limited by the funds available to us and also some of the acute needs that legally exist in the community today. So those are all considerations that administration is exploring moving forward. And as either grant monies or additional financial budget permits are things that we would explore and bring forward in a more expedient manner. But with the funds available to us today, administration is recommending the council endorse our action plan and advance those funds as directed through the strategy here. So I guess the recommendation in short is that committee recommend council adopt the 2021-2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan as presented. And I'm open for questions.
All right, thanks for that, Director Manuel. Lots to unpack here, but any questions from the committee? Councillor O'Toole.
I do want to thank you, Mr. Manuel, for this report. It's been a long time coming where we can actually put some stuff together and make a big difference. In previous years, we've been able to support the community, but not to the extent that we are available to do today. And so with that, I would make the motion. And that is something that I'm looking forward to seeing some of this come to fruition in the very, very near future. So I imagine there's still lots of questions out there, but I am willing to make the motion when time comes.
Okay, Councillor, I just want to confirm, we can have some discussion here. Did you want to make that motion now, or did you want to let some discussion happen and then come back to you for the motion?
I will make that motion now. The one that's on the report.
Sorry, I missed that now. I'm sorry, I'm just cutting out here a little bit. Now, okay.
Yes, I'll make the motion
okay,
now.
So that motion stands for now, and we'll just open it up for discussion or debate here. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. Just in terms of action 1 with the rental supplement programs, I just want to make 100% sure I'm understanding correctly. If that recommendation passes, we won't actually be making any progress on affordable housing. We just won't be letting an existing program slide as provincial funding's cut. Am I understanding that correctly?
Through the chair. So as we understand it right now, my understanding through Grand Spirit Foundation today is that everybody that was on their existing subsidy program was going to be maintained despite the cut, in that they were essentially going to pause new entrants to the program. And as people fell off the need to have subsidy, they would just lower the number of bodies. So they're essentially going to run a deficit, but support it through other means. This additional funding should allow them to help more people in that interim.
But they're not going to be the number of people helping. We're not actually helping more people that have been helped historically through that program. Am I understanding that correctly? Like, we're filling in for funding they're losing. We're not adding new funding into the program.
Yeah, just to provide, through the chair, to provide a point of clarity, I would say that would be accurate, except that they had not planned on actually cutting the number of people that were receiving funding today. So in the long term, if that funding wasn't stabilized, you are correct. We would just be we would be backfilling provincial funding. However, the way that they're kind of managing the reduction, this, at least initially, will see more people helped.
And if I may, one more, Mr. Chair. Just, I'm kind of curious in terms of if these actions go to council and council approves them, what's the next? What would administration be bringing to budget deliberations in the fall in terms of our affordable housing strategy? In terms of, and show my hands a little bit, I really would like in the fall for council to have a conversation about, are we increasing investment in affordable housing, or are we just leaving the status quo? And I'm kind of curious if that conversation will naturally come up at budget, or if I'd have to try to get council to pass some sort of motion if I wanted that conversation to happen.
CEO Valente?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest, because of the nature of the program as affordable housing as a whole, that this will be a topic for the next council retreat when we do strategic planning. I think at this point on the term of council, we need to look at the next 4 years, and if it's one of the top priorities for the council after the election, our strategic planning session in January, that will be the appropriate venue to talk about this and to design a long-term strategy. So I would suggest, we do that in that way. We can set some funding aside in November this year, but the bulk will be done in 2022.
Good with that, Councillor Rusty. Any other questions for Director Manuel? Councillor Fisi.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that. Thanks for the report and all your work and effort into this, Director Manuel. I do have a question on the rental supplement program, because my understanding is that the province dictated last year that there would be no new additions to it and that there would be a freeze in funding. And then this year, there was the reduction, and the plan was to go with no new clients. So I guess my question is because there's increasing demand with people being out of work or split relationships, one stat that sort of jumped out at me when I was looking at the provincial records was that lower-end rental properties, 1 and 2 bedrooms, actually increased in 2020 by 5.8% as far as their rents. Now, the higher ends, they decreased. So if you're paying $1,400 for a 2-bedroom apartment, that actually went down to about $1,290. But it's the lower-end apartments that are actually rising in their value. So with the situation due to COVID and the economy and increasing demand, am I understanding this right? You did say that it would be able to help more people, but my understanding was prior to the $750,000 being cut from our budget on the rent subsidy, that was a freeze and a reduction. So am I right in that, or have I got it all mixed up?
Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. No, you're correct. So what would happen if the city was not involved in this is the program still remains under review at a provincial level, that rent subsidy piece. But in the meantime, they had signaled that as of April 1st, that Grande Prairie's annual budget for this was $3 million, and that $3 million would fall to $2,250,000, which would obviously lower the number of people that Grande Prairie would be able to help. That being said, Grande Prairie had informed me that they would deal with that by not cutting off existing rent subsidy clients, that as people fell out of the program, because there's ebb and flow, there's people that no longer require that subsidy, so that they would do it through attrition, right? That April 1st, they weren't just going to cut off a certain number of people from subsidy, that they just wouldn't take new entrants to the program, where the city funds aren't tied to those same conditions. So the $650,000 we provide, if they're not dropping people off the list, in theory, that $650,000 could be allocated to support people that are waiting. Now, again, that's not long-term sustainable funding. And there really should be, and I think it is one of our advocacy items that will be brought forward for council shortly here, a real push to replace that lost provincial funding with that federal program that's willing to allocate millions and millions of dollars into this province for this purpose. There's, frankly, the only hang-up on it right now is the feds require matching contributions from the province, and the province of Alberta is saying, we provide rent subsidy, it should already count as our contribution. Now give us your subsidy. And the feds are saying, in other provinces, provincial governments have agreed to enhance supplement. So if the feds were going to allocate $10 million, the province would add another $10 million. And that's their choke point right now, is the province just wants their contribution recognized today, and the feds want them to invest more. At the end of the day, it sounds as though they're close to an agreement.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification. Appreciate it very much. Chair Palat, I have a couple more questions. Is there anybody else in the queue at the moment? Or?
I'll jump in at the end, but you might ask some of them that I was going to, so go ahead, please, Councillor Piedmont.
All right, I'll just start swinging. I really appreciate all of the recommendations. I don't know, it makes the city a very compassionate entity right here, and really addressing the needs of the people and the organizations that serve to house the people. So, yeah, all the recommendations I'm really supportive of. Just a couple questions, one on Action 4, Action 5. So the first question on Action 4, the transfer of social housing units. So it's estimated value at $2.8 million. I would imagine the transfer of that to Grand Spirit would allow them to leverage those titles to, future housing builds. But if we weren't going to transfer those titles to Grand Spirit, what would, outside of just maintaining the status quo, what would the city end up doing with those properties?
Well, as you indicated, Councillor, at this point, it would maintain the status quo. There is a potential that, the city could sell them and do what we're suggesting that Grand Spirit does, is either reallocate those funds or we could refinance those projects. The issue I see with that from the city side is it would impact our debt capacity. So if we were to use that money as a down payment on some other initiative, and we were the financiers of it, it's going to impact our debt capacity, where by giving them the resource or the asset, Grand Spirit doesn't have the same debt capacity limitations that the city has. So it's a little, if the intent is to use it for affordable housing or social housing projects, it makes more sense to give it to Grand Spirit, as they'll have more tools than we will.
Awesome. No, thanks for that. And the last question I had was on Action 5, consulting services to private non-government organizations. So the last sentence, where possible, we will assist with navigating the complexities of the various processes. I understand that we already do that right now to a certain degree. With the announcement in the budget of $500 million for social housing capital builds and stuff, I would imagine that we might see an uptake or an uptick, I guess, in people or developers looking, both private and not-for-profit, looking to develop housings out of that fund. Do we have the capacity currently in our organization to meet that demand if, let's say, we had 6 proponents come to us like over the course of a month to help them navigate that system?
Through the chair, fair question. So I would say that's been the course. So over the last year, it probably has been about 6 proponents a month that we're working with in this regard. That being said, administration's learning some lessons. Part of it was understanding as a municipality where we were headed with this portfolio, whether housing corp or whether, so I think we focused what our role is going to be more specifically now. And I think the good thing is a lot of the projects are seeking the same funding programs and whatnot. So once we have insight into a program, it's fairly easy to share that with the various proponents. So I do believe we have the capacity to provide that level of service. Certainly, we can't do the projects on their behalf, but we can help guide and navigate them. And we are working on putting together a collection, almost like an information package on these are the various channels available and a more simplistic guide.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Just a quick follow-up, if I may, Chair Platt. And do we run the risk then, because there's so many different housing types, housing builds, especially in the housing continuum and the spectrum of it all, do we run the risk of potentially losing funding for ourselves or Grand Spirit in specific housing builds by I guess, assisting in this information of funding streams? Is there a level of risk that we could lose funding as a city?
Through the chair, that is a consideration, Councillor, and particularly the programs that we direct people through are ones that they are eligible for, regardless whether the city endorses it or doesn't endorse it. Where I'm more cognizant of what you're referring to is when the city's asked to provide its support to a project. So when we're asked for a letter indicating, using the Rapid Housing Fund as an example, you're right. A community may only see one successful project, and there does become a point where the community has needs, at least administration sees needs in the community that are more closely aligned with one project versus another. And in those instances, I have no problem making a recommendation to council as to whether we should or shouldn't support a project and what I believe the risks or benefits may be. So I think we still always have that forum where the true municipal endorsement of a project does come through committee oftentimes. And I think that would continue.
Awesome. Thanks again for this report and the thoughtful and compassionate recommendations. Really appreciate it. I think we're moving in the right direction, at least in this. So I appreciate all your answers.
All right. Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Director Manuel, I just had a few questions for you as well. I'm just wondering, I've heard from landlords concerned about rent subsidy programs sometimes when it's direct rent supplements. I'm just wondering if you can explain what the difference is and why we wouldn't just do landlord rent supplement programs all the time, or if there's criteria differences. I'm just not sure why we would not go right to the landlord on some of these, because I've heard from several landlords that they'd rather not place tenants in this scenario, and I don't want that to be an issue. So can you maybe explain that to me a little bit better, please?
Yeah, certainly. So Grand Spirit does operate both. They operate direct to landlord and direct to tenant. There is some space for direct to landlord where we just outright have to secure a unit, because when some people are seeking rental application, frankly, a regular private sector unit will screen out some applicants based off either credit history, family configuration, and so on. So there is some specific units that are always necessary as a backstop. But overall, the preferred method is direct-to-tenant, and direct-to-tenant for a number of reasons. It allows the person receiving the funding, one, doesn't necessarily require them to move, because the rent subsidy would not include the cost of relocation. So if you're in an existing unit that's, say, $100 too expensive for you, and you can't quite make it, by us having a specific unit to move into, you would then have to be forced to give up the unit you're in, potentially with the penalties associated with that for breaking a lease early, the cost of the actual physical move. The direct subsidy unit may actually be in a place that's not conducive to public transit, to your place of work, and so on. So I guess when you consider things like schools, co-parenting, all of these sort of considerations make the idea of giving the choice to the person versus specifying the specific unit as more desirable. Additionally, one thing we've learned is that when it's direct to tenant, there's not a stereotype associated to the unit or to the person. Frankly, the landlord will never know, or should not likely know, that this is a subsidized person. meaning sometimes subsidies can have the effect of driving prices up, where under this scenario, it wouldn't be known by the landlord that this is a subsidized unit.
Okay, no, fair enough. And just, can I ask, are these supplement programs only for Grand Spirit patrons, or would this qualify through other community social development programs?
So at this point, the action identified in this plan is specific to Grand Spirit Foundation, and Grand Spirit Foundation does administer the program on behalf of the province of Alberta. It's an existing program with a long history. It has the robust verification processes for eligibility. So again, just to be expedient and to leverage stuff we already have in place and not add additional administrative costs and so on, this is focused on Grand Spirit.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And then just a couple other questions on the seed funding for continuing care. I guess, you know, we're going to approve this as council potentially. I'm just wondering, will council have more oversight on specifically where that seed funding would go? And I guess for me, I've said many times I have a real appetite to see us try to do a seniors project in the Montrose cultural area. And I just wonder if council will have the ability to weigh in on where we'd like to see some of this money allocated to if we are looking at a major project.
Great question. And so a number of these actions are going to require subsequent council direction. And for instance, the seed funding for community care, that's basically setting, what this action is doing is getting me direction to say, set aside this amount of money for when something comes forward, they can then have a council allocation. I can come back and say, yeah, council's allocated this dollar amount, this is the funding source. And when council gives the green light to a project, that's where it will be. So I would say the majority of these actually involve future council touch-ins with specific motions that will have to be made and approved through council. It just gives me a path forward to allocate the funding that we have and start advancing. The one that I see going out the door immediately would be the rental supplement program. That one's pretty straightforward. We already have the budget. We know the demands there. I think the approval of this is just going to trigger that. However, the transfer of the social housing units, for instance, there's going to be subsequent council motions that are required for that, and the conditions that are associated with that will have to be refined and so on.
Okay. Sorry, just a couple more questions here. Just on the transfer of the assets, I can appreciate why the city wouldn't want to have these sitting in our books. I know Grand Spirit's a great organization. I'm struggling a little bit with just selling all of our assets and handing it to somebody. I guess, and, you know, I can think about that before it comes to council, but I am struggling quite a bit with why we wouldn't sell them ourselves and give them the money, why we wouldn't keep these in our own stock and look at a budget item, as Councillor Bessie talked about, on a more holistic plan about just giving them more money. I'm really struggling with just getting rid of assets and handing them to them. I mean, we lose complete, although I know they're a great organization, I've got big confidence in Steve and his team, I am worried about just handing $2.8 million from an organization and then really not having a lot of oversight probably after that, other than being prescriptive of how we set it over. So just a concern for me. I'm going to flag it today just for the rest of the councillors to kind of think about it, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to approve that when it comes to council. I'm struggling with that one a little bit. And the reason I'm struggling with it is the one thing I don't see in this plan, and I would love to see in a plan, is we talk a lot about home affordability. The one thing I'd love to see our council get a plan around is home ownership. I'd like to see some people that are getting out of the house and continuing but actually owning a home. And I look at these potentially 19 units as a great opportunity for the city to look at rental homes or putting mortgages on them with low-income families or immigration families to try to get them into home ownership so they change their housing continuum altogether. So I guess for me, there's some thoughts around that. And I'll ask maybe specifically on that, is there another one coming, Director Manuel, that's going to maybe speak to home ownership, not just always about subsidies and low income? I think that's a part of the continuum that personally right now I think we're missing, and I'd love to see us be looking at. So is that a future conversation? Or? So 2 points. I guess I'll provide a little bit more clarity on the social housing units because this is a really condensed and rolled up report that omits some of the specifics that we've considered. The important thing to understand with these 19 social housing homes is that they're deep subsidy tenants, which means the tenants may only pay $300 a month on the unit,
although the unit may cost, say, $1,000 or $1,200 a month to operate. And what happens right now is the province of Alberta covers that difference. The province of Alberta has indicated that that's going to stop, that they're not going to provide that deficit funding in the future. And they've challenged the housing management bodies to find methods in which the units can become part of a bigger envelope of self-sustaining properties. So really what they're talking about is where a number of market rent units subsidize the deep subsidy of the social units. And essentially, that's what, given these assets to Grand Spirit, could allow accomplishment of, right? They could initiate a project which would see market units integrate into a complex that also includes the social units to offset those ongoing costs. So it's part of a larger strategy. It's not so much just give them the asset. There is some liability to the city with this if we do keep it and that funding, that social housing funding is removed. But you're right, the city could frankly do other things with it, and it is a discussion point in the future. In regard to your home ownership incentives, the city for 10 years has up until 2018 had a home ownership grant program available, and it was fairly well subscribed. Changes to the CMHC's mortgage stress test did prove challenging, which ultimately kind of concluded the program. But administration does believe that there is a potential path forward on a similar initiative. At this point, it would just come down to funding it. So if funds in a future budget or through stimulus funding or whatever were to emerge, I think administration does have a basis of a program that could be presented.
No, thanks, Derek. I'm not surprised to think that, or to find out you guys weren't thinking about that. I just didn't see the report, so I'm not surprised to hear that. So those are all my questions. Just kind of letting the committee know I probably wouldn't support number 4. Everything else in here I'm really, really happy with. And I think it's a great initiative that we're looking at moving forward on it. But I think it's going to be a great council conversation next week. So any other, Councillor Bressy?
Yeah, just I'm likely to support all of these, but just a thought for committee and for council is I appreciate what City Manager Galante said about, hey, we'll wait for the next strategic planning cycle to figure out a holistic approach of how we're going to tackle this. That being said, maybe I'm the only one, but I know we've also got a request from Build in front of us about incentivizing building of housing. And I know I've got appetite personally for spending more aggressively, not to solve all these issues, but as a form of economic stimulus. I think that our construction industry is hurting. I think that this is a natural area for me to be looking at economic stimulus. So not any motion I'm hoping to pass here, but just something that I want to bring up, and I hope is in council's consciousness as we're talking about this. There might be opportunity to not just help some struggling industries, but also make some real social progress in our community. So I assume that's part of the conversation at the Economic Development Committee, whether or not that comes to a recommendation. I assume that's part of the discussion there. But just want council to know that I've personally got appetite to have more of that conversation.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bressy. Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do agree that this is a good start, and hopefully that we can extend this to something that Mr. Bressy has mentioned, that we can get some incentives going on with the build. And but this is a great start. It's going to address a number of different areas through the community. And you know what? The fall comes, we got some more money available. Maybe we can do some more structuring as well. So thank you for your comments, Mr. Bressy. I'm on board with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. So it sounds like we're going to have more conversations about initiatives coming out of this, which is great. I think that this council has been very, very active in trying to help with the homeless and the home affordability strategies, and I think we all have an appetite to keep moving that forward. So See no more hands up in this, I guess we'll call the question to those. So if you could please hop over to your e-scribe and vote. Waiting with our new e-scribe system. We're all manually voting here on another platform, so I'm just waiting for that to update so we can see the results.
Councillor Plott, that motion carried on my end.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate that. We're trying to use different systems right now, so there's always the odd bit, so appreciate you letting us know. So that motion does pass. And with that, I'd ask Councillor Friesen if she's there. If she's popping back on already, we get to see your smile again. And we'll move on to 3.3, the Traffic Enforcement Efficiency Bill 21 review. Director Manuel, back to you, please.
Certainly. So I did this as a verbal report because what the outstanding item started off with to where it's gone has evolved over time. So it started off as a means to looking at the way conventional traffic enforcement was conducted and what the resulting process from tickets through court looked like, and whether the city could have done it in a more efficient, effective, and customer service-driven manner. Then in the fall of 2020, the province introduced Bill 21, which is called the Provincial Administrative Penalties Act, which threw a curveball. And at the time, it was provided at a really high level and essentially just said, we're going to do something different. We're not going to do conventional court processes in regard to traffic enforcement or any provincial fines for that matter. So at the time, we didn't have a whole lot of information. And what I'm here today is to provide you an update on where that's at and what it looks like for us moving forward. So one of the reasons that we were particularly concerned with the former way of doing traffic court and the way officers issuing tickets and the administrative process and the people charged with an offense going to court, what all that meant. And we identified that at the time, just shifting through our lean process that we did as part of our Greenbelt projects and enforcement services, identified that paper tickets versus electronic tickets, which was the shift we wanted to make at the time, was going to save enforcement services approximately 7,600 hours annually in staff time. Just the difference between a paper ticket and an electronic ticket and how it processed through the various components of the justice system. Well, we also highlighted to the province that they stand to gain just as much from that as we did. And apparently they took that to heart through their own assessments. And they actually even went a step further. The proposal we had was just to go digital. And they decided to rework their whole system, which looks like it's going to have even more tangible benefits for us. So what's going to happen now is where an offense occurs, everything's going to be done in an electronic manner. There won't be written tickets anymore. It would be done via computer. And the computer application that those tickets are generated in is going to, the tickets are generated in is going to be where that ticket lives. Essentially, that's where the peace officers are going to upload all their evidence to. That's where the person that received the violation is going to be able to review the evidence against them. And it's also going to be, if they wish to appeal it, the mechanism where they're going to appeal it, it's reviewed by an adjudicator and decided upon. So the whole thing, more or less, going to go virtual. it will be the end of traffic court. There will no longer be guilty, not guilty pleas. There's not going to be a first appearance and then a trial, which from the city of Grande Prairie's perspective is really beneficial because we spend thousands of hours every year sitting in courtrooms waiting for matters to be heard, and that's being cut out. So effective December 1st, the administrative penalty information system will be live, and this will be the process that people that receive provincial or municipal violations in our community will be involved with. There certainly hasn't been a great deal of public information rolling out about the transition as of yet. Administratively, Enforcement Services and the RCMP have recently been engaged on what the process looks like for us. And that's really the point now, is that December 1st is going to signify the change internally for our police and peace officers. And leading up to that, the province is obviously going to have to get the general public educated and engaged on what that looks like as well. What we do know is that's going to divert 2 million tickets annually from the court systems to this new process. Our understanding of it is officers won't be testifying any longer. What will happen is the evidence that's collected, so certifications of equipment, qualifications, will all be done through affidavit evidence. So it's written submissions on part of both the enforcement agency making the charge, and if somebody wishes to dispute it, they will provide written arguments to that as well. It's my understanding as to how it will work. So the intent of the outstanding item was, how do we make the judicial system more effective and more efficient, and potentially look at municipal bylaws as a means of doing that? The province has responded to that and essentially provided a platform that looks from a administrative perspective in how we operate to be far more effective and efficient than even what we were seeking. So at this point, I would say that the outstanding item is really concluded. There's no role for us to play in this other than to transition to the new system and then assess what the impacts of that are for us as an organization, as a community. But we won't be in a position to do that until sometime in 2022. So I do believe that the intent of the outstanding item has been met, and that I'm open to any kind of questions or direction from council regarding it. But I would like to conclude it from the outstanding item list, as I feel it's no longer as relevant as it initially was.
Okay, thanks for the verbal report, Director Manuel. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. Just a concern to flag with committee that I've got is, I think a difference between what we were talking about, what this is we were talking about there'd be this alternative municipal process that'd be more efficient for us, also a lot more user-friendly and better for the person receiving a ticket. But that person, if they felt that process wasn't fair, could opt out, and they still have the ability to go before a judge. And this new system really does, in my opinion, take away a lot of the right to process and appeal and elements of our justice system that people had a right to previously. So I don't know if anybody in council is interested in digging in more, but I've personally got severe concerns that our officers are going to be participating in a system that I don't know has all the components of justice that is necessary, which is one thing for if you're getting a $110 speeding ticket, a whole other thing for if it's an intoxicated driving charge and you're losing a license and there's very severe consequences. So just something flagged with committee might be worth you doing a bit more research on if you're interested. So just want to flag that. A question I did have for Director Manuel, though, is what's the plan for the freed up resources with us? Is there any thought yet if that's going to be if the recommendation from the administration is going to be to put this back into enforcement, come to council with potential tax savings, or if there's been any of those thoughts yet?
It's something certainly that we're assessing. We do get a fair bit of staff turnover within that area. So we do always perform a vacant position review when we have those positions come vacant. So we don't quite know what the impact is just as of yet. The primary one seems to be that instead of sitting in courtrooms, we'll have people out on the road, right? So I guess it will just determine what level of service we want to provide in the community and what functions we direct those resources to perform. So I would say it's a little outstanding right now. We don't have a clear picture. We have some estimation as to what we think the impact's going to be. But I'd say it's still to be determined.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Director Manuel? Okay. Seeing none, I guess we can move on to our outstanding items list. Which looks like you picked through it mostly here.
Yeah, I'm hoping that with today's reports, we can identify the 3 items as concluded. So I guess maybe I'll just provide, I didn't speak to it in my presentation, but I did touch on it on the report. So in regard to the Chamber of Commerce and their request on a per door incentive for affordable housing, administration certainly does recognize that that is a means to add additional inventory to the community, and additional inventory would likely have an effect on pricing. That being said, with the funds that were available to us today and the acute need and what we saw as programs that had maybe a little higher priority for funding allocation, that's the path we went. Certainly would be willing to provide more analysis around that if it was decided to proceed as part of economic stimulus grants, or if council allocated additional budget dollars to affordable housing in the future. We have done more analysis specific to that ask and would have recommendations related to it.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Was something I was going to actually ask about, was the Chamber one specifically, because although it's addressed in the report, it doesn't really have an outcome. It's kind of spoken to. So if that pleases everybody else on committee, I guess the only thing I'm just wondering, Director Manuel, how are we following up on the Chamber on that? Just, you know, we've got kind of something here. We haven't got a formalized plan. I'm just wondering how we would follow up on the Chamber on that. So
that's actually a great question. Mr. Dan Wong and myself have been in regular communication and going back and forth, and he's been a great resource in providing me some guidance. But I can certainly summarize the administration's analysis of the proposal and where we saw some flags, but also some opportunities, and circulate that back to them, and certainly CC Council in that as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other questions on the outstanding items list? Councillor O'Toole.
So with the outstanding items list, your request is to remove 1138, correct? And 1055, and quite possibly 1119.
That'd be my request.
Mr. Manuel has indicated that if we accept the outstanding items list after this, these would all be removed from today's reports.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to update the outstanding items list as presented by Chris Manuel. And I'd like to thank him very much as well, and his group of people, for getting us down to a very low number. I don't want to say anything other than that, but I'm pretty happy with all the work that's been done and the way that the process has been gone. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor O'Toole. So we do have a motion on the floor, so I'll ask us all to hop over to our e-scribe if there's other comments, and vote, please. And while that's waiting, I'll just say to the committee, I guess we've got to get our thinking hats on. We can't have Director Manuel have nothing on his list. It seems like, you know, we've got to put something on there for him. So let's get creative on that. I'm sure Councillor Bresky has a few ideas. So.
I'd just like to point out that we're rather proactive as well. We have a number of things coming forward.
That's all good. You give yourself a pat on the back, man.
Councillor Plott, that vote was carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you for that. And so with that, we'll close out our meeting, and I think we need to take a couple-minute break, and then we'll come back on for our infrastructure and protective services.
Yeah, I'll start it on
infrastructure. Yeah, thanks.
Council, we're actually going to do the in-camera infrastructure meeting first, and then come out back to this meeting for the regular meeting. So we have a separate Zoom link for the in-camera. So we'll just hop on over to that one, please.